Jonathan, our friend Jonathan, should appear on the screen. And he has been with us at Hope for a few years, and he is a wonderful man. And he's been part of something called 247. This is taken, the 247 name is taken from a verse in the Bible in 2 Corinthians, and you can see it, maybe you can see it out there. It says, "But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us." So what 247 is it's a new kind of discipleship. So we think it's a test. Right. Sorry, everybody. Just record me, it's a test. That's all I am. That has never happened ever when I've ever built it. Now, Theo, can you go upstairs? Oh dear. So sorry about that. Sounds like we're testing it or something happened. Anyway, not to worry. But anyway, sorry about that, everybody. So 247 is a view of discipleship. So discipleship meaning practicing the way of Jesus. So what does it mean to actually follow Jesus and the way he lived? And a group of us, a small group of us, have been doing that since September, between September and July, meeting once a month on a Friday morning to spend time together, to build relationships with each other, to have some teaching time, to get to know each other, to pray for each other. And then also those people are then giving some of their time in the week at Hope as well to serve in a whole variety of ways. So Jonathan is, unlike me, very good with technical things and computers and all that kind of stuff. So that's what he's been doing, serving it. And then he's also been involved in these Friday mornings once a month. So this is just a little clip of him, just to a little bit about what T47 is like. And if anyone is interested in that, we will be running it again in September. So now is the time to get in touch with us, have a chat with us. You can email us at hello@hopeoxford.org if you want to find out any more about 247. So, thanks, Stefan.
Hello, church family. 247 is the intentional discipleship course. 247 is a 12-month program that's from September to August that helps you develop your relationship with Jesus and your relationship with those around you. Last time, I wanted to develop a close relationship with God, and I wanted to dedicate a portion of my time to service to God in the church. Personal value to me. You see a commitment to God. Our sacred rhythms. Over those months, we look together at how we can discover more about who we are as individuals and ways in which we could know God more intimately. So each person is unique, and each person has their own rhythm. And in my personal with God. I could go on and on about spiritual practices, the Enneagrams and sacred pathways that we've looked at. It's been a real eye-opener. Now, the second thing has been about how we are called to do the work that Jesus did. We have been reading through a book together by John Wimber called The Way In is the Way On. It talks about the practical applications of the gospel. Take serving as an example. Serving is a big part of being a Christian and a part of our DNA in being a church. Part of the 247's discipleship year is also to commit time to serving within the church. We are called to be servant-hearted, and that is what 247 has helped us do. From the heart, in my time so far, and there are two that stand out the most. Together as a group you speak to people about their life, their life, and how prayer. Each prison turn was asked to pray for the rest of the team every day for a year. I got one of the early men. We really know each other well. Much closer to the team as I relied on God in my prayers. I really enjoyed my time with the course so far, and I would happily recommend it to anyone.
Okay. And that is Jonathan. So as I said, if you want to know anything more about 247, then please do chat with me or Josh, and we would love to speak to you. So I think Josh is just going to say a couple of things. Run off with a piece of paper. Yes, a couple of things that we say every time we meet. So apologies if you've heard this before, but we think these things are really, really important for us as a church and kind of the culture of the church that we do at home. So these are the 4 things that we would say are really things to kind of think about and get involved in if you're exploring hope as a church, if you're unsure about faith in God. These are great things to be involved in. So come on a Sunday, which is obviously today, and we have some slightly different things on Sundays, which we'll share a bit more about in a moment. Life groups are our midweek groups, and they're smaller groups where we really do life together, we get to know each other, we become family together. So there's a number of those that have been meeting online during lockdown. Hopefully that's obviously going to change. So go on our website, the details about life groups. Serving, so even just to make stuff like this happen, we need people to do things like do the media and be involved in worship and lots of different things. So there's lots of opportunities to serve, as well as stuff that we really want to do in the system and the community. So, for example, we run something called Small Steps, which is a children's housing equipment bank. And so we receive referrals for that from families that really need support, and a whole host of other things. So that's lots of opportunities to get involved and served and reach out. And then finally, giving a proportion of your income regularly. So yeah, if you would call Hope your home, then we'd really encourage you to do that. It's really more about journeying with God than it is about us kind of needing money. Although, however, we are only funded by people that call Hope in your home. So that is really helpful. So there we go. Those are 4 kind of things that we would say good things to take a look at if you're wanting to explore what Hope is about. So a couple of things we're just going to flag to you that are coming up. Hopefully they might appear on the screen. So next Sunday we have this rhythm where we do this kind of thing on the 1st and 3rd Sunday mornings of each month, and then on the 2nd and 4th we have the gathering, which is a community of adults who do a whole host of different things. I believe, you might give me a wave if I'm saying the wrong thing. I think next Sunday they're going to be doing something really practical, serving people in the local area. Is that right, Izzy? Yeah, thank you. So yeah, there'll be more information coming out about that next Sunday. And then alongside that runs Sunday Club, which is down here, which is for under 11-year-olds and their parents and carers. So it's a whole lot of fun, lots of activities. So that's Sunday Club. And then just a couple of other things to bring to your attention. May awkwardly has 5 Sundays. I don't know whether you've realised that yet. So we're going to be doing something slightly different on the 5th Sunday, and we are joining with Oxford Vineyard Church, our friends there. They have very kindly invited us, if we want to get involved in a retreat that they are running. So it's a half-day retreat on both Saturday the 29th and Sunday the 30th of May, and it's in person, which is even better. So if you want to come along to that, if you just sign up on their website, Oxford Vineyard Church, and then you can come along. It's 9:30 till 12:30 on the Saturday and repeat a bit on the Sunday. And then one last thing, I don't know, I know someone here who knows a lot about the Callaway Carnival, but I don't know whether the rest of you have been. It's wonderful. It sadly didn't happen last year with coronavirus. But it is happening again in July this year, slightly different. So they're not able to do all the usual stuff down Callaway with the parade and things. But what they are wanting to do is people to have street parties or garden parties with their neighbourhoods, with their neighbours. So we would love to be involved in this and to organise street parties wherever we are. So That's on the 4th of July, and we're letting you know that now as well, because if you did want to actually organise a street festival on the street from the 6th Council, and I think the deadline for that is the 22nd of May, so we need 6 weeks. So yes, and you probably can't read it out, it's small on the bottom, but if you go to the Callaway Carnival website, all the details about that are there, and all this kind of stuff will be on Instagram and Facebook and things like that as well. So, enough of us talking. We are now going to join Izzy, her friend Jack, as the second part of our small series that we've been doing on earth care. So this is where we're looking at what it means to love God's earth and to care for our environment, which I'm sure it hasn't escaped any of us that this is an incredibly critical issue of our time. And so 2 weeks ago, I shared some thoughts about what the Bible's got to say, like what's the theology of the environment, and what does God say about the earth, what does he say about our role in it, and how we're to take care of it. And then Izzy is going to be interviewing her friend Jack, as you will see on the screen. And Jack works for the Christian Development Charity Tier Fund, and he works specifically around all these issues of climate change and the environment. So he's an excellent person to ask about these things, and he'll give some really practical kind of advice as well about how we can be people that really care well for God's earth and all the people in it. And so yes, I'll hand over to him.
Hi, so we are following on from the series on the environment. And this was 2 weeks ago where we did a bit of last year. So I've got along my pal Jack, who actually works at Tier Fund and works a lot on like climate change and environment. But also, you know, even before he worked at Tier Fund, was genuinely passionate about it. Together and yeah, we have like, right, we're going to go vegan, we're going to be completely zero waste, and you know, on that. Once maybe keep line pie that costs a lot of money because people are very expensive, things like that. So we tried to go along the journey together, but it's great to have you.
Yeah, thanks for letting me come along. I still have nightmares about that week that we decided we were going to do everything at once.
Yeah.
Poor Pete, our other housemate, has had to live through us making those decisions. But it was fun, we learned a lot.
It was fun. And yeah, so we kind of just wanted to have a chat with Jack a little bit about like maybe that journey of faith and what environment, what journey along it a bit. So it is from kind of also. So my friend Jack tell us a little bit about like, I don't know, how do we like connect thing around the environment? Or is it like an integral part of it?
It's a good place to start though. I think for me, the first time I connected the dots was seeing how so we had a book from someone who worked at the time, and I was 14. And they were talking about poverty and justice, and then they were talking about how climate change was making poverty so much worse and pushing people back into poverty who work hard to escape it, and making storms and droughts more severe. And so the first point, it was like, oh wow, this is a justice issue, and if God calls me to love my neighbour and to care for the poor, then I have to engage with climate change, especially because the way that I live here has an impact on like the global population. So I guess the justice angle was like my kind of link to environment. But while we were at uni as well, learned loads about how creation as an always really vital. Like our first calling to be stewards or caretakers of this creation, of course, and live well within it. And like our God becomes part of creation, gets born into it, flesh and blood, standing in the mud, like creation with us. And so I think, yeah, at first it was like justice issue. There's no way Christians should ignore this. But also, like, creation is precious. God delights in it and enjoys it, and we should look after it.
Yeah, like, so I guess, like, on that, like, what do you think? But, like, what do you think is, I don't know, like, if you have, like, one why this is
Yeah, I think my go-to would always be the first two verses, verse 12, and along around. Verse 2, you will the fact that be transformed by the renewing of your mind, and you're able to test what God's word is. And that kind of calls not conform to the patterns of this world, and is so relevant to this conversation. Paul was writing that today, he probably talked neighbours, world, or about the environment. We're called to conform to it, and instead, lies. And so instead of conforming to the worship, the movement of like what festivals are buying to like
okay. So one of the things basically is it a distraction?
yeah. I mean, we get this question quite a lot. For working community. But then cut back and said, what should we be working on? And then, like, just doing change. Works hard to look at poverty, then droughts and crop failures, and like stories from working, and they're constantly telling us that like the rains don't come, or that like when especially I no longer there. And so so for us, like the justice issue, and actually if we want to see people free of poverty, then
Really seem perfect, where these two things sound where like this is about like people in needs. Is that like an example?
I just want the top of my mind at the moment, Central America. I was talking to and I was asking him about the few hurricanes that they had in November last year, and those hurricanes really hit the news because it was the same time as the US election, and so the army was dominated by that instead of what happened. But they had two record-breaking hurricanes within the space of 2 weeks, which has never happened before, and it wiped out almost the whole harvest. They had years of harvest, rains out of all. And then just as they're about to celebrate this like abundance, these two wiped out the crops, displacing like, hundreds of thousands of people, and like, the threat of hunger in the coming months. I'm talking about it, and he's saying that climate change isn't a theory, or a future threat here, like we the past few years, and like even when we've worked hard and done loads of work to grow all this food, like these storms which didn't happen before, at this scale or this or this frequency, are now putting all that work at risk.
Yeah, and I guess like now we are actually starting to see like what they call like climate change refugees, where like people we are actually starting to see refugees now who are leaving. And I guess even in America, where like a whole section completely transition like people. So, yeah. I guess in places like Honduras, there's a country, lots of different issues.
Yeah.
Hi, Hope Vineyard. We are following on from the series on the environment after Katie did the talk 2 weeks ago, where we talked a little bit about the theology of the environment and why we should care. So I brought along my pal Jack, who actually works at Tear Fund and works a lot on like climate change and the environment. But also, you know, even before he worked at Tear Fund, was genuinely passionate about these things. We met at uni and lived together, and yeah, we had phases, and we'd be like, right, we're gonna go vegan, we're gonna like be completely zero waste, and you know, we journeyed along that. Thought of once tried to make a key lime pie that cost a lot of money because we bought very expensive vegan ingredients, things like that. So we've tried to go along the journey together, but it's great to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for letting me come along. I still have nightmares about that week that we decided we were going to do everything at once.
Yeah.
Poor Pete, our other housemate, just had like to live through us making those decisions. But it was fun. We learned a lot.
It was fun. And yeah, so we kind of just wanted to have a chat with Jack, just a little bit about like maybe that journey of faith and like why we care about the environment, what's this whole creation thing about. And also to think about the kind of practical parts of that. So we've sort of mentioned a little bit that we've kind of done that practical journey, or like trying to journey along it a bit. So it is from a kind of professional experience, but also from personal space. So my friend Jack, can you tell us a little bit about like, I don't know, how do we like connect our faith with this whole thing around the environment and creation? Like, is it just for the hippies? Or is it like an integral part of our faith? Bit of a leading question, but
yeah, it's a good place to start though. I think for me, the first time I connected the dots was seeing how climate is a justice issue. So I heard a talk from someone who worked at Tear Fund at the time, and I was like 14, and they were talking about poverty and injustice, and then they were talking about how climate change was making poverty so much worse, pushing people back into poverty who'd worked hard to escape it, and making storms and droughts more severe. And so at the first point, it was a like, oh wow, this is a justice issue, and if God calls me to love my neighbor and to care for the poor, then I have to engage with climate change, especially because the way that I live here has an impact on like the global poor. And so how do I engage with that? So I guess the justice angle was like the first time I kind of linked faith and environment. But while we were at uni as well, learned loads about how creation is like present all the way through the Bible. Like our first calling is to be stewards or caretakers of this creation. We're called to live well within it. And like our God becomes part of creation. He gets born into it, flesh and blood, standing in the mud, like he's right here in the creation with us. And so I think, yeah, at first it was like, this is a justice issue, so there's no way Christians should ignore this. But then also like creation is precious, God delights in it and enjoys it, and we should look after it.
Yeah, like, so I guess like on that, like what do you think, this is off script, so you know, but like what do you think is, I don't know, like do you have like a Bible verse or like one part of the Bible, like one bit of theology especially, where you're like, oh, this really like hooks me into why this is a kind of part of discipleship?
Yeah, I think my go-to would always be the first two verses of Romans 12. I'm going to get them the wrong way around. Verse 2 is, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. then you'll be able to test and prove what God's will is. And that kind of call to not conform to the patterns of this world is so relevant to this conversation. I think if Paul was writing that today, he'd probably talk about patterns of overconsumption that wreck God's creation, or patterns of entitlement that say, I deserve a cheap t-shirt, even if someone's forced into slavery to make it. And those kind of patterns of indifference that actually we don't care about our neighbors on the other side of the world or about the environment. And we're called not to conform to those, and instead to choose to live the way of Romans 12:1, which is to offer our whole lives as a living sacrifice. The Message talks about it as like, take your eating, sleeping, going to work, walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. And so instead of conforming to those like destructive patterns of the world, how can we live a way that is like worship in every decision we make, from like the most mundane of like where we get our washing up liquid or what food, like what vegetables we're buying, to like the biggest decisions we make. So how can all of it be part of like honoring and celebrating our Lord and Savior?
Yeah, love it. Yes, amen. Okay, so you work at Tear Fund.
Yeah.
And Tear Fund is a Christian charity that's all about poverty. It's all about, serving Jesus where the need is most.
Yep.
So why on earth are you focusing on climate change? Like, is it a distraction?
Yeah, I mean, we get this question quite a lot, because when people think about Tear Fund, they think about responding to a disaster, like a humanitarian response, or working in communities of extreme poverty. And maybe engaging with climate change doesn't fit in that for a lot of people. But it was 6 or 7 years ago that Tear Fund kind of took a step back and said, like, what should we be working on? And like, what is contributing to poverty? What is preventing us from like pursuing our mission more fully? And climate change was the huge threat to all of the work that we're doing, that actually, unless we tackle climate change, we're not going to see an end to extreme poverty. We're going to see communities who worked hard to lift themselves out of poverty then face extreme droughts and crop failures. And like stories from the communities we're working in, they're constantly telling us that like the rains don't come when they used to, or that like where the fishing villages used to be are no longer there because the sea levels have risen. And so for us, like, we engage with this because it's a justice issue. And actually, if we want to see people free of poverty, then we have to address this as well. So that's where all of our engagement with environment stuff comes in.
Is there like an example of like a place where in your work you have like really seen the kind of perfect, example of where these two things merge, I guess, like the kind of poverty and climate change, and where like then actually, especially as a Christian, you just think, even if you don't care about creation, you're like, this is a justice issue, this is about like people in need. Is there like an example of that?
Yeah, there's a bunch. I guess one that's at the top of my mind at the moment is Central America. Especially, I was talking to a colleague in Honduras a couple of weeks ago now, and I was asking him about the huge hurricanes that they had in November last year. And those hurricanes didn't really hit the news because it was the same time as the US election. And so our news was dominated by that instead of what happened. But they had 2 record-breaking hurricanes within the space of 2 weeks, which has never happened before. And it wiped out almost the whole harvest. They've had years of bad harvests because the rains aren't coming when they're meant to. And then just as they were about to celebrate this like abundance of food, these 2 huge hurricanes wiped out the crops, displacing like hundreds of thousands of people. And like the threat of hunger in the coming months is now huge. And I was talking to him about it, and he was saying like climate change isn't a theory or a future threat here. Like, we've lived through it the past few years, and like even when we've worked hard and communities have done loads of work to grow all this food, like these storms which didn't happen before at this scale or this power or this frequency are now putting all that work at risk.
Yeah, and I guess like now we are actually starting to see, is it like what they call like climate change refugees, where like we are actually starting to see refugees now who are leaving. Like, I know there's even an area in America where like a whole huge section has been completely flooded and like people have had to leave. So yeah, and I guess in places like Honduras, which is already a vulnerable country to all sorts of different issues, add that on top Like,
yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
it's complicated and real. So I guess, like, as Christians, how can we practically respond to this problem? I guess a lot of us might feel overwhelmed, and like it is overwhelming. But like as Christians, I guess, what's our distinctive, and also like what can we do practically?
Yeah, I think that's, yeah, a really good question. Like, what is our Christian distinctive? I think part of that is to be a people of hope. Like, this is really overwhelming, and it's really urgent. And so I don't mean hope in kind of like a like dismissive, like, it'll all be fine in the end kind of way, but of like, how do we live out that like concrete hope of like, we are resurrection people, like wherever we see like death and destruction, like we know that God can be at work bringing life. And so I think, like, yeah, like our Christian distinctive has to be grounded in our hope of who Jesus is and who our God is. And I think, yeah, like I was reading Jesus talking about, like, if you have the faith as small as a mustard seed, you can tell this mountain to move from here to there, and it will. And I think that kind of faith is what we need when we face like this huge mountain of climate change, of actually knowing that if we step out in faith, we ask God to work, and we say we're gonna like live in a way that honors you, then like trusting him that he can use that to bring about change. I think really practically, there's a few things we can do. So maybe we can go through them in a bit more detail, but we can pray, we can like live differently, and we can think about this in the way that we live our everyday lives. We can be talking about it with others, and we can engage politically as well. So I'd say there are the 4 things we could do. So I think with lifestyle change, there's loads we can do. Me and you have been thinking about this stuff for years, of like, how do we live sustainably? But yeah, like, how can we reduce how much red meat we eat? How can we like choose to cycle or walk more often than driving or flying? How can we think about all of our everyday decisions and just say, how can I honor you, God, and your creation and your people in how I make these decisions? We can, I mean, one really easy thing is to think about where your electricity comes from. So you can really easily switch to a renewable energy provider, even if you can't afford solar panels on the roof, which I definitely can't. But you can switch to a company that provides you with renewables. So someone like Bulb or Ecotricity or one of those, and they're often cheaper than the big energy companies as well. So it's a good way. Yeah, it's a good way of saving money as well as caring for God's creation. Yeah, so there's loads we can do with our own lives to live differently, and I can guess that comes back to that Romans 12:1 thing as well, offering our lives. And then
one thing that, like, on that, just like that actually Jack introduced me to, but now I'm a massive advocate for, and we do, is there's an amazing magazine / website called Ethical Consumer. I don't know if you were going to mention this, so sorry if you.
Yeah, no, it's great.
But like, yeah, they're literally, their whole job is to like research kind of companies and to see like what they're doing about the environment, but also people and animals and pollution and all sorts of things, politically and human rights. And then they kind of do these like league tables that are super handy for both like ethical places, but also like high street shops. And they've got things from like clothes to cars to, you know, even like browsers, I think, like internet browsers, like literally everything, they've got it. So would really recommend them.
Yeah, it's a really good way of like learning what different things do. Yeah. So yeah, living differently.
Yeah.
We can pray. Obviously that's so important. Like, prayer really does make a huge difference to this stuff. And like, part of my role at Tear Fund is writing weekly text message updates for people to pray about climate change. And it's amazing. Like, there's so many times where we've asked people to pray about a specific thing that's happening, and then we see God working in amazing ways. So yeah, prayer is crucial to this. And then talking to others about it, so having conversations with others. There's a Christian climate scientist called Catherine Hayhoe, and she lives in Texas. Great name, isn't it? But she's like a world-leading climate scientist, and she has done a TED talk about climate change, and she said the most important thing we can do is to talk about it, because lots of people are concerned about this or wondering what to do, but aren't sure there are others around them who care, or just have never had a conversation about it. And so we then go through life thinking, oh, maybe it's not so bad because no one's talking about it. So actually, how can we have those conversations with our families around the dining table, or in our workplaces, of asking like, oh, where are our pensions invested? Or like, what's the company doing about climate change? And of just starting these conversations. They don't have to be confrontational, but of just saying this is important, and like, are we thinking about this or not? So just of starting conversations then brings it to the front of everyone's mind. And some of those conversations can be political ones as well. So can we like contact our MPs and say like, what are you doing about climate change? This matters to me as a Christian. And like Izzy was saying with ethical consumer, if you're like looking to shop sustainably, but then everything is out of your price bracket, write to the companies that you do normally shop at and then say, I really want to shop ethically, like why aren't you sourcing your stuff better? Or what are you doing about sustainability? And of using our voice. And I think that like we can often underestimate the power of our voice, of saying, oh, I've signed a petition, or I've tweeted someone, or I've done something, and it probably doesn't make a difference, but it really does. I guess an example would be last year, or the year before. I forget that last year was a year because it was the pandemic. Yeah. But a couple of years ago, we were running a campaign about plastic pollution and the big impact it has in developing countries. And we were trying to influence Coke and Pepsi, Nestle and Unilever. So like huge companies, and Tearfund is tiny and insignificant to them. And so we did research and we tried to influence them, and some listened, some weren't interested. But actually then Christians started signing petitions or sending them emails. And because there were so many of us saying, this matters to me, you should be paying attention, it then opened doors for us to be talking with those companies. And we've been able to host dialogue with like waste pickers who are like the bottom of the ladder, like people who are working in dangerous conditions, sorting through waste, and putting them in conversation with these big companies. And that is only possible because loads of people have signed petitions and written emails, and they might not realize the impact that they've had, but their actions do all add up. So I'd say, yeah, even if you don't feel like you're seeing results from it, it really does add up, and companies pay attention to what their customers think.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess like just on that kind of, but just rewinding a little bit, like if we were in a conversation with our friends, like is there kind of like I don't know, like a key, like even one fact that we could remember, or like statistic, or a place we could find those?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we've got a short two-sided fact sheet, which is kind of like the basics of climate change and justice, which I can send you the link to, Izzy, or it's on our website. If you go to tearfund.org/action, it's then in the resources bit of that page. But one of the stats on there which really struck me was that the poorest 3.5 billion people are responsible for 10% of emissions. So I'll say it again, the poorest 3.5 billion people, so the poorest half of the world, are responsible for 10% of emissions, which is a crazy stat when you think about it. And it shows like why our actions here are so important. So I guess that would be a standout stat for me that might get a conversation going about why we should care about this.
Yeah. That's great. Well, it's an awful helpful stat.
Yeah.
So I guess like I would say all of us, like whether we've engaged with this before, whether we're beginning to engage with it, or somewhere in the middle, most of us, I guess like we all have those moments, probably continually at times, where we're just like, is this really making a difference? Like if I go and buy something that's from an ethical shop rather than here, or if I cycle somewhere and rather than drive, like in that moment you just feel like, is this really going to make a big difference? You've touched on this a bit, but like I guess how could we maybe think about those moments differently to help us think, actually, yeah, this makes such a big difference, like this is really important?
Yeah, I think one way to think about it is like all of our actions are contributing to like a movement for change. So every time we're choosing to cycle, or every time we choose to shop slightly differently, we're adding our own decisions to like millions of others who are also making those decisions, and all of that does add up. We were talking about it just before we hit record, but after Blue Planet 2, lots of people were shocked about plastic, started to think about shopping slightly differently, and were talking about it. And all of those actions then put pressure on business and government to rapidly change. So suddenly you saw plastic straws disappearing from restaurants, and carrier bags, and government investing loads in recycling systems. And it was all because lots of us were talking about this and making our own decisions and actions. And so I think be encouraged that all of our actions and practices add to this like growing momentum for change. But I guess one encouraging story perhaps for you is a campaign that we've just won. So in December, we saw an amazing answer to prayer. And then in March this year, it came into law. So we've been campaigning about how the UK government spends billions on fossil fuel projects in developing countries. So kind of building big like fossil fuel infrastructure instead of investing in like solar and renewables. And so we were asking them to stop that funding. And we were building some momentum. People had sent emails to their MPs and they signed petitions. And we were seeing like real momentum building. We were getting ready to celebrate. The conversation got all the way to 10 Downing Street. And then it kind of just stopped dead in its tracks. It got nowhere. It was off the agenda again. And we'd kind of run out of ideas for what we could do. So we messaged about 1,000 people and just said, can you start praying with us about this? Like, it was so close, but it's been stopped at number 10. And so we prayed, and a week later we heard that the conversation had started again, but it wasn't necessarily going anywhere. So we sent an update to everyone and said, can you keep praying? It's now back on the agenda. And within 2 or 3 weeks, we went from it being off the table, not interested, to Boris Johnson announcing it, that the UK would be the first major economy to stop funding fossil fuels in developing countries. It was amazing, like massive answer to prayer. We were working with loads of different organizations like Friends of the Earth and others who were just thinking, oh, maybe we're going to have to campaign about this again next year because we've not won this time. But actually, like, prayer made a huge difference. Like, we saw God's hand all over it. And we got to that stage because people had been doing their bit of sending emails and living in a way that showed we cared about climate change. And all of that kind of contributed to this moment where we could really see like God at work in the decisions that were made. So I'm really encouraged by that. And I hope it encourages others as well, that actually we can see amazing stuff happen when all of our different actions come together.
Yeah, and what a testament like to the other organizations as well, like both prayer but also like the church.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and I think as well, like just in those like everyday moments, like just trying to think about like that actually, you know, we're called to like love God and love our neighbor. Like that is ultimately what Jesus called us to do, isn't it? And so, you know, companies and governments often put profit over people. We're called to live in an upside down kingdom. So actually it's worship to be like, I'm going to choose to do this, even though it costs me. You know, it's picking up our cross daily, isn't it? It's like, this is going to cost me, but actually it honors somebody, it honors my neighbor wherever they are, like whether, you know, environmentally, so that actually they can live in an environment where we can all live in an environment where, you know, we're safe, but also, yeah, just labor standards and all those kind of things that all kind of merge into this kind of big issue of injustice. So I think a lot of it is also worship. Like I'm worshiping God by like cycling rather than driving right now, because I'm honoring him and I'm honoring his creation and I'm honoring his people. For me, like that really helps when I'm like, oh, it's raining outside and I can't be bothered to do this, or like, oh, that top is just so cheap. You know, so that's what I want my life to be about, like ultimately.
Yeah, I think that upside down kingdom is so important, because like when you talk about like, oh yeah, this is loving our neighbors, it can often feel really far removed. Like, why is me cycling loving a neighbor? Or like, why is me reducing like red meat or something be like loving a neighbor? Like it feels quite disconnected. But like what's that? There's a quote, isn't it? It's Martin Luther King Jr. who talks about how like before you've like finished your breakfast, you've relied on like half the world. From like where the oranges are from in the juice to where like all sorts of different things. And so yeah, like we are connected with all of these people. And I guess our consumer culture that we're in, like disconnects us on purpose. Like you see a t-shirt on a rail and you don't think about like where the cotton was grown or who sewed it together, or you like see a chicken breast in a supermarket and it's in a plastic tray and you don't think about like where that chicken ran around, or like where that plastic was produced, like where was the oil extracted.
Where will it go?
Like,
Where is it in the bin?
yeah, exactly. And we're kind of fed this disconnected system of like, you can have whatever you want whenever you want it because you're worth it. And you can consume whatever you want. And actually, like, we know a God of relationship, like a God who exists in relationship, a God who calls us into relationship with him and with each other and with his creation. And so actually we have to challenge that consumer culture that says it doesn't matter where it came from or where it goes. Like, actually, it really does matter, because like we're called to love those people and be in relationship with all that God has made. And so, yeah, like that upside down kingdom is needed to disrupt like the consumerism that we're in, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I feel so like bubbled up. We can talk about this for ages. In fact, we do talk about these things for ages, which is great, and I love it. So yeah, I hope that this has been helpful, and I mean, there's like loads of practical things that can come out of that. Like we shared a few things, like pray, consider like your lifestyle, talk to others, and get involved in kind of writing to your MP or writing to companies. If you want to hear more about like certain companies, like check out Ethical Consumer, or I'm happy to chat about the things that I have read but I'm still learning. Do get involved and do consider it. Jack, thanks so much. It's been super fun to chat, and speak to you
thanks
soon.
for it. Yeah,
Bye.
thanks.